Good afternoon, everyone. We're just waiting for 3 more minutes and then we'll start. Um, Apologies for the delay. We'll start in 3 minutes exactly. Thank you.
Um, all right, we're going to start, everyone. Greetings. We would like to welcome all of you to our last webinar hosted by the AFRONE in this mentorship program. We're glad to have you all on board and looking forward to making this a fruitful session as usual. Before we begin, please know that the microphones and cameras will be turned off to minimize the distractions and ensure optimal quality. Uh, for the interaction part, your active participation throughout the chat function is highly encouraged. Please add all the questions there and we will monitor them and respond to as many as we can throughout the presentation. The session will run for 1 hour. First 45 minutes, we'll have the main presentation with our speaker, followed by 15 minutes for our Q&A session. Recording and dissemination. Please note that the session will be recorded for future reference and knowledge sharing. It will be later made available on our LinkedIn, on our WhatsApp group, and on the AFRON website as well. And lastly, know that your feedback is valuable to us. So we will share a feedback form for this webinar here in the chat at the end. And on the WhatsApp group as well, please take a few moments to share your thoughts with us and fill in the form. Thanks a lot. Now, please join me in welcoming today's speaker, Dr. Morenike. She's a professor of child dental health, consultant, a child dental health physician, and former dean of the Faculty of Dentistry in the Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. Her research interests include epidemiology of early childhood carers, dental and anxiety management, sexual and reproductive health of adolescents, and ethics of community engagement in and with research. She has over 350 publications in peer-reviewed journals. Her H index is 53 and over 22,000 citations. She is a fellow of the National Academy of Science in Nigeria. Please go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to put off my mic, camera also, for sake of conserving the bandwidth. And I hope I wouldn't spend up to 45 minutes so that we can engage as much as possible. I'll encourage all of us to ask as many questions as you want. It might be related to this, and it might be beyond this, because this is our last webinar. But please feel free to ask any question that is of interest to you. It might include questions of the past seminars we have done. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly share with you the outline of the session. First of all, I'll spend time explaining why it is important to write manuscripts. But to show that, I'll probably declare, I'll share a profile of myself. And then I'll focus on the three critical elements of manuscript writing. One is the fact that you have to write the manuscripts. And I'll share with you the do's and don'ts of preparing the manuscripts for submission. Once you have submitted your manuscript, you would expect to have reviewers' comments. That is, if it passes through the editorial process onto peer review. I would share with you the do's and don'ts of handling reviewers' comments. Finally, it is expected that having handled the reviewer's comment, your manuscript should get published. I would share with you the do's and don'ts of handling published manuscripts. And then I'll conclude, and then we'll open up the space for questions. Please once again be encouraged to leave as many questions in the chat box. For this session, I'll be sharing from my own experience. I am not copying or pasting, neither have I read extensive literatures to share the lessons I'm sharing here. Therefore, it might be skewed and reflect my bias. And this is why I'm opening up the space for questions. Like Sarah noted, I have 362 publications, which means that you will, as an early career researcher, ask, why have you continued to publish despite the fact that you have already gotten your professorship? What is keeping you interested? And not just myself, but many others in the field that continue to publish while in the academia. And I continue to get scholarships, grants, projects, consultancies. Why? Why all this? Why all this? Why are you leading research groups? Why are you expanding your vision? What's it all about? And for me, that is what I want to share today. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So why is manuscript writing important? I said there are primary reasons and secondary reasons. When I share this with my own colleagues and early career researchers and students, I note that in every society there are industries and there are areas of specialization. For there to be, however, the research industry, like I share with my colleague, is an elite industry. And you must recognize that you, as researchers, are elites for a purpose. A lot of national development and societal development, as well as community development, depends on you. You generate the data that will inform effective programming, policy formulations, decision making that should make lives better. That is why you do research. Manuscript writing is about sharing publicly the results of the research you've conducted to answer a social problem. And therefore, what you do with manuscript writing is sharing your findings to an answer to a social problem that becomes a building block to get us to the ultimate truth there is to address a problem. And for me, I think this is very important and a distinguishing feature between developed and developing countries, or resource-rich and resource-poor countries. While resource richness continues to set up a viral cycle where the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer, the point where that cycle breaks is the ability of the elites to make a difference. And therefore, when the academic industry, which is an elite amongst others, gathers itself and recognizes that the things you put out in public will make a difference, then you would start to break that cycle. What happens is that when you write out manuscripts and share answers to social problems, then individuals, agencies, and institutions have access to this information. And they can garnish this information, being that that is their role as policymakers. It is also very good that you as researchers cross into the realm of policymakers if you can. But if you cannot, you make that information accessible to policymakers so that they can garnish it and publish and put it together to formulate policies, programs, and guidelines. These policies, programs, and guidelines are the things that make changes in the lives of people. Sadly, like we already noted from the first discussion, the absence of information from Africa limits access to information that can shape and design issues for Africa within the global context of decision making. And therefore, in the absence of that data, global policymakers will have to extrapolate other data that are not particularly generated from Africa to make decisions for Africa. I am sure without letting you saying anything, you do know that that would be an ill fit because it is not generated from within the context, and therefore the depth of understanding of the context will be lost. And all you can get is superficial wins. Having said that, manuscript writing is a big issue, and therefore it goes through rigorous peer review so as to ensure that the information that is shared out there is valid and will result in effective and efficient changes when it is used. It is very important that you understand this, that research is not about you acquiring papers for career progression. It is that will definitely happen as a secondary outcome. Research is to generate information, trusted information, to make changes to the lives of persons. And that is why when we write manuscripts, it's a very thorough scrutinizing process that allows the public to trust the results of our publication. When you want to do research, you first plan it, and there's a scrutiny process for planning, and that is what the ethics committee do. Once you have written, there's a scrutiny of that also before it is published. That is what peer reviewers do. And therefore, when there is a manuscript outside there in a journal, it is trusted. And once again, I reiterate that for those of us that go through training, predator journals cannot be the way to go. When to start running after predator journals is simply because you are not understanding why research manuscript publication is critical. It is a decision-making process, not only for agencies and institutions, but for individuals who are seeking for information to change their own life practices, as well as treatments and management. And it is because of this that there is support always given for research and manuscript publication. And that's why you have grants. Grants is free money per se. It is not a loan, because it is understood that grant is supporting a social process. And the things that you're supposed to do with grants should benefit the society at large. It is that understanding and the importance of what you do as researchers that informs so much free funds going into the research process. It's not because they're crazy or they don't know what to do with money. It's because of the significance of the outcomes of research. In effect, manuscript writing is a public good. And yes, for those that are engaged in the business of manuscript writing, be you in the academia or non-academia, it will impact on your career progression positively. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what are the do's and don'ts of manuscript writing? Please note that there are rules governing manuscript writing. First, you write a manuscript to address a gap in knowledge. It is not just because you feel or you have the ability to write well. Your introduction in a manuscript justifies why you want to do this. There must be what we call equipoise. Equipoise establishes that we truly do not know. We truly do not know. There's truly a gap in knowledge. Probably you have done this looking at this perspective, the public health perspective. Maybe we should look at it through a human rights perspective, and we'll see something different. Or if we look at it through a feminist lens, we will see it differently. It's about addressing a gap in knowledge. And you have to follow the rules. There are ABC rules to writing a manuscript. If you go to the Equator database, you would see the guidelines guiding all forms of research. If you are conducting cross-sectional research, there's a stroke guideline for how you write a write-up, not conduct research, apologies, but write up your research, I meant. If you're doing cross-sectional studies, there's a stroke guideline that will guide you. If you're doing clinical trials, there's a quad guideline. If you're doing qualitative research, there's the QREC, CQREQ. That's how it's written. And there are myriads of them for every single type of research you want to do. Please go once again to the Equator website. Even if you type stroke, you will get to the Equator website. It will show you the rules guiding writing of a manuscript. And that's why I said there are ABCs to it. If you can know the rules guiding the writing of a manuscript, you can translate it to how you need to develop your protocol for conducting the research. Once you can follow the rules, then we will be able to generate evidence that is of importance and of significance for public good. Another do that matters in manuscript writing is not only following the rules, but please ensure that you make your data publicly accessible. It is becoming more and more important for the data that supports any manuscript that is written to be publicly accessible so that it can also be peer-reviewed and be certain that the data that is analyzed truly corroborates the findings. Please also note that when you are writing a manuscript, follow the guidelines of the journal that you plan to submit to. The ideal thing is to identify that journal ahead of the time of writing the manuscript so that you can adhere to the rules as you are submitting the journal. So you do know what the journal's interest is, and you've identified if your manuscript fits into the journal interest. Please note as much as possible, only share, not even much as possible, it is compulsory, only share factual information. Don't exaggerate, don't change p-values. If your p-value is 0.0054, don't summarize it to 0.005 because it's not 0.05, it's 0.0054. Okay, let everything, don't overstretch. You cannot do a cross-sectional study and present it as though you're doing a longitudinal study or an inferential result. It's only an hypothesis. Share factual information. Do not hide data. Once again, research is not about you. It's about putting out information there for social good. And therefore, when you found nothing significant, it's nothing significant. And it might be explained 10, 15 years later, but that is factual information. Do not try and walk to an answer. Generate a factual answer based on the methodology you have generated and share. Every research has its limitation. Please note that in your manuscript, acknowledge the limitation. Submit quality manuscripts, which includes ensuring that the language you use, be it English, French, Arab, Portuguese, wherever language you've written it in, is clear and concise. In effect, every sentence you write in your manuscript must not have a second interpretation. There must be only a single interpretation for the sentence that is in your manuscript, and that makes it clear. There is clarity. Finally, please note that when you have written your manuscript and you're submitting it, ensure that all persons listed have the right to be there. One of the things that makes every single person eligible to be a co-author is that they give approval for the final version of the manuscript to be submitted. Please ensure you receive approval and consent from all your co-authors before submitting. Okay, this is one of the gaps I see in many. They just submit. No, don't assume anybody is giving consent. Receive the consent. And I can share with you troubles I've gotten into this. I remember once an organization wrote me, and said the staff noted that he did not give consent to submitting the manuscript that I had published. I had no problem whatsoever going into my mails and retrieving my engagement with this author every single way, including the consent I received from the author with the final submission when I was going to submit finally. It did not take me 10 minutes. It was all documented. And when I have co-authors and I'm sending the final version, I ask, if you do not give consent, then you are not eligible. Why do I tell the stories? I also study ethics, and I tell people that many times in your life, trouble would only come when you become elevated. At this time, it's not an issue. And I'm sure you've seen a number of trouble happening to high positions persons much later in their life. An excellent example is the recent removal of the Harvard president on the allegation of plagiarism. Very recently also, the Prime Minister of a country was removed from office on the allegation of plagiarism. When you become important in life, the history of the manuscript you wrote 20, 30, 40 years earlier may come to haunt you. And so it is important that your record of manuscript writing is done properly. When you become successful in life once again, they will dig into your history and they would now start looking for those manuscripts you've written that you've breached all the principles. Because your future is bright, please remember that you start right. Ensure that you do all the things you should do and document them appropriately for the future. Next slide, please. When you come to manuscript writing, please do not conduct research without ethical approval. It is not right to even have started a research and then go back and put dubious information together just to get ethics clearance. Do not conduct a research without ethics clearance. And if you get it wrong, then let it go. Don't plagiarize or falsify information. Which means every information you put in your manuscript, please ensure that it is appropriately referenced and not otherwise presented as your voice. There is no problem overwriting references. If you have 100 references, that's okay. If you have 200 references, it's okay. But it is very wrong to attribute a statement that is not yours to be yours. When you write manuscripts and you are interpreting your result, please do not overgeneralize or oversimplify. Very recently, or today, I read a manuscript that was written from a country. It just looked at one institution in one single institution in that country. And it reports, and the study participants number was 180. And then the study says, I am reporting on a country. That's overgeneralization. 100 and something persons from a single institution cannot represent a country. It only represents that institution if you have generated that data through random sampling. If you did not generate the data through random sampling, there is a problem. There will be skewness. So do not overgeneralize. Just state the facts exactly as it is, and it is okay. Do not oversimplify. Don't give undue credits to authors, which means if there is an author that did not meet the authorship criteria, do not include them. Do not welcome your friends just to be part of a manuscript. It is wrong representation. Don't give an author first place authorship when this person did not merit it or work for it. This is about science and credibility. This is not a fun playing place. And therefore, for your authorship leave, please only give persons who have duly made the authorship criteria authorship. It's also very important that you do not discard raw data. I can tell you I've fallen victims of this. Very recently, someone asked me for my data for a systematic review, and I'd lost it. Data is gold. You must keep your raw data for a minimum of 10 years after publication. I met that. It was many years after before. But now we do know that the same data that you generated 30 years before may be important now. So there are sites where you can store your data. That's how you make it open access. Once it's there, people can continue and continue and continue to use the data rather than going back to the same person, same community to generate data. And then they become research fatigued. Do not discard your data. And at the least, keep your data information for at least 10 years after publication. Anybody can come back to you and ask you to defend the manuscript you have submitted. I have once again noted that you do not submit to predator journals. The problem with predator journals is that they have poor quality peer review, and therefore you get things into the public space that has not been scrutinized. Sadly, people who trust the research industry will assume that what is out there is valid information and therefore will go running with it, whereas it is not. Finally, please do not submit manuscripts to multiple journals at the same time. If there's any reason you want to withdraw your paper from a journal, write to the journal and let them know you are withdrawing. So that's the documentation. You only send to the another journal days after you have written for withdrawal, not the same time. Just give it days. If they respond, okay. If not, remind them and make sure you have your documentation before you go to another journal. Do not submit to multiple journals at the same time. Once you submit your manuscript, it will go through processes by the journal. The journal will handle it. One of the things that happen is if your journal do not fit, or if there are problems with you, or no, if your manuscript, apologies with my language, if your manuscript does not fit, or if the manuscript has problems, the editor might send it back at that point. Please note that this is not a reason to be upset or feel disappointed. Even despite my years of publication, I still get rejected, and so many other persons get rejected. You only do know that with time, the number of rejects decreases because you start to understand the enterprise and how to write good quality manuscripts. So if you get a reject, no problem. You get to take the comments, brush it up, and resubmit. But if the manuscript is going to likely get to publication, what you'll get are comments from reviewers. How do you handle these comments? For the next few minutes, I'll talk about the do's and don'ts of handling reviewers' comments. Next slide, please. So once you have reviewers' comments, it's important that your response is polite. I'm sure there's some of you here that may have submitted manuscripts and 1 year after you haven't gotten a response. Reviewing manuscripts is a voluntary thing. Nobody's paid for it. Therefore, if anybody spends time with your manuscript and reviews it, you should show appreciation. Be polite. Do not be rude. I have had to lay my hands off manuscripts because of the way authors respond. It's very rude, very shocking. I remember once I got a comment, I responded every single thing. The author just said it's not going to change, it's going to stick. I just sent it back to the editor. I'm sorry, I can't deal with this. Be polite, thank them. Please ensure you respond to all comments, whether you agree with the comments or not. If you agree with the comments, you effect the corrections. If you do not agree, explain why you do not agree and move on. You do not have to agree with all comments, but as much as possible, there's validity. Think through That is why quality journals get quality reviewers. When you're responding, be concise with your response. Just focus on what you are asked to address and be transparent with the changes. Every change you make, please track it. Don't hide some. It upsets reviewers because reviewers will go through in details. And usually, in case you don't know, they have access to the preceding version of the manuscript. Thorough reviewers will take and look at these things together. And when they see you changing without tracking, they become suspicious. Okay? If you need clarification about a comment, ask. That my team has looked and we don't understand it. Ask. But do not leave any comment unanswered. Okay? And if your manuscript was rejected, use the comments you have received to revise the rejected manuscript before resubmitting. Finally, once you have revised, please ensure that all co-authors agree with the revisions and your response to the comments before you resubmit. Next slide, please. In terms of handling reviewers' comment, please do not take feedbacks personally. The comments were with respect to what you've written. The authors have no idea who you are. Do not interpret the response. Oh, it's because I'm a female. Oh, it's because I'm Black. Oh, because I'm from Africa. No. Relate with the feedbacks. Do not make it personal. Also, don't delay with your revision. If it's possible to send your revision back in 24 hours, you would find that the sooner you resend back your revisions, the earlier you get responses and a clearer for publication. The more you delay, the later your response also comes. So don't delay with your revisions. Send comments as soon as possible. And don't overlook any comments once again. Justify with evidence any comments that you do not agree with. So if this person says, oh, I've done a scoping review, you did not do a risk bias analysis, I will support with evidence why scoping reviews does not have to do a risk bias analysis. Not that no, it's wrong. You must generate the evidence, a reference, to show why you do not support that or have very good arguments. And please use, once you get your comments, use that opportunity to read the manuscript again to make it tighter, to make it concrete, and to make it more solid. Do not be verbose with your response. Concise. Focus on what the question is and answer, and just give responses to the questions. Next slide, please. Once you have replied the reviewer's comments, it is likely you have done well. You might revise once, you might revise twice, you might revise thrice. Very unlikely, but it's possible. But once it's published, please celebrate. Celebrate, celebrate, and celebrate. Share with your friends, disseminate widely, not use the social media to disseminate. Disseminate widely to people you think it will be relevant for. And when I say disseminate widely, one of the things I used to do, I don't do it now anymore, is that I go through the list of references. I get the email addresses of the people whom I reference. I also share to them and celebrate. Here is my publication. I used your reference and I found it useful. Thank you. You find out that you will get very engaging discussions with this reference persons, and it can give you new ideas on what to do next with your study. But more importantly, they also will find it important and may also use your piece of work for their references. Where it's possible, host webinars to discuss your findings. Conference presentations are usually made for papers that have not been published, but there are few conferences that will allow you to come and share your published paper. Make it possible. If your paper is of importance to policymakers, develop policy briefs with it and share it with them. You'll be surprised that they take it very seriously because we rarely engage with them with a published paper. The most interesting stakeholders I find are journalists. They look forward to we researchers engaging with them. We rarely do. Share in very simple language, share your results with journalists. They will take it up and run with it. Okay. Monitor your citations and follow up on your studies. It's important that you note, if your papers are being, it's exciting actually to have your papers cited. Just monitor it. And if there are elements in your own study that you felt you noted in your discussion that needs follow-up studies, you do the follow-up study and gradually grow a line of research. Because with each research you're doing, you're opening more grounds and seeing more gaps, and you continue to do it, and then you have a history of working in an area. Please note that in the industry, once you have written or published on a subject topic about 10 times, you then become referred to as an expert on that subject matter. So yes, grow your study by following up on the gaps you have identified. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, and when you're sharing your published manuscript, please do not overinterpret or misrepresent the information. Note very much that the public you're sharing with may not understand the details and are learning about the issues you are presenting through your lens. Once again, don't overinterpret or misrepresent the findings. Stay factual. Your published manuscript may also have copywriting and licensing restrictions. Please do not disregard this. Where you cannot share publicly the published manuscript, please do not share it. You can share your piece of work, but not the published form. And if for any reason, after publishing your manuscript, you find errors, please do not hide it. Get back to the authors, to the publishers, and let them be aware of the error. They would write an errata to correct it. They would write an errata, and that's being humble and being truthful, because you do know, once again, that the publication is not about you, it's for the public good. Once you've published, please do not publish the data in another publication. Do not use the manuscript, the data twice. The data set is for a manuscript publication. Okay. And then on the final note, next slide, please. As I start to conclude. Next slide, please. In conclusion, please, once again, publishing is a public good. It's something to invest in. You would get career progression, but that's secondary. It's about making a change, national developments. That's what it is about. And I reemphasize, why you see countries that have developed is because they have generated evidence, good quality studies to make changes through policies and programs. We still don't have that well seated in Africa. And so what you're finding in Africa is that we keep borrowing information and data from around the world and trying to make it well for our society with their data. We're just wasting time and resources. We need to generate our country level data to inform our country level practices and effect change. And when you want to write, please follow the rules. Follow the rules on authorship. There are no ghost authors, there are no gift authors. Follow the rules on content, follow the research guidelines. Please ensure your data is accessible in public spaces. Manage peer review comments with humility and gratitude. And once your research is published, follow the rules on dissemination within the limits of the journal. And finally, celebrate every manuscript published. It is a lot of work that has gone into publishing a single manuscript. You therefore have every right to celebrate it. On that note, I move to my last slide and I say thank you, and I'm open to questions. Thank you very much. Over.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Morenike, for this lovely session. If any of you guys have any questions, please go ahead.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Mutinta. Okay. Thank you. Seems we'll end early then, in the absence of any questions.
I think there is a question here by Matinta that says, what is the criteria to include someone as a co-author? Kindly differentiate between a co-author and a contributor.
Thank you very much. A co-author should otherwise have met a minimum of 3 criteria. One is conceptualization. You should know that once you plan manuscripts, you get a manuscript actually because you have done a piece of research. And that piece of research also would have involved persons. So in planning the manuscript, not necessarily planning the research that generated the data. In planning the manuscript, you must have had a team that developed, co-conceptualized the manuscript with you. That's the first thing. So that's why for manuscripts, you do have teams. More and more, you are seeing less and less of publications where there is just one author. And the public space is getting less and less favorable for manuscript with a single author. And it's because with a single author, the risk of manipulation of data is very high. The more authors you have, the less likely is the risk of manipulations of data. In addition, the more authors there are, the more brilliant your piece of work, because you're bringing in perspective from multidisciplinary angles to think through a single issue. So it's a lot more powerful to have not only multiple authors, but authors from diverse fields. So you must have co-created, co-conceptualized. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the data curation and data analysis must have been done jointly in some way or the other. And the third thing is that there must have been intellectual input into the writing of that manuscript. So it's not one person that wrote and concluded and submitted. You all have looked, evaluated, made corrections, made intellectual inputs, agreed that this should go in, and agreed that this should stay. And of course, all of you must have jointly said, this final version, please submit for publication. This final version, please submit for publication. You will find that Q1, Q2 level journals now will contact the co-authors, okay, and ask that, and get them aware that a publication has been submitted with their name on it. So you meet the criteria at the minimum for you to be a co-author. If you have done one or two of it in any way, edited or just helped, just one or two, then you are acknowledged, okay? The place is acknowledged. Even as at acknowledging, you must please ask permission of these individuals if it is okay for them to be listed as acknowledged. Somebody read your manuscript without putting intellectual input or conceptualizing, that doesn't make them an author. Having said that, I heard the word contributor. I am not sure what that means, but I'm hoping I would have made a distinction by what I have shared now. But if otherwise, Mutinta, I have not answered your question comprehensively, please ask further clarifying questions. Thank you. Over.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Okay, we do have a question from Dr. Godwin. He says, thank you, Ma, for your commitment to developing our minds in the sphere of research and manuscript writing. And he has a couple of questions. He says, qualitative research designs are by nature small scale scopes based on the last lecture on this platform. However, also, from this platform, we have been educated that for our research to gain international relevance, our research scopes must be a rather of large scales, say a country scale or regional scale like West Africa. How do we reconcile these two in relation to qualitative research designs?
Okay, let me answer that first. One of the things you do understand about qualitative research is exploring. They answer the question why. That's what qualitative research does. It answers the question why. And therefore, once you start to explore the context of a quantitative research, it's relevant because you're answering why. However, when you're answering why, the study participants many times are focused on a specific context. So you might be answering the question why to a question and looking at why is this happening in among the Yorubas, or why is this happening in amongst males, not females. You would explore a specific context to the question why. It becomes relevant. Okay. So it is not the scopes, when you talk about the scopes, are context specific. But if you are doing a qualitative research, like I said, you are doing a qualitative research and you go study one hospital in Nigeria and assume that that represents all hospitals, that's false. Assume it represents the state, that's false. Assume it represents the country, that's false. That's overstretching. It is only an audit of that hospital, except you want to extrapolate it to hospitals that have the same epidemiological profile for that hospital. Okay, so that is it. But once you do scope and reviews, it gives insight. Qualitative studies gives insight. Okay, and the insights are context specific, and people will acknowledge the context specificity of it. It's very unlikely that you will publish a qualitative paper and people will then start extrapolating into other places. It might seemingly represent their context, but they will also want to review it within their context. So there are different things, and there's appropriate balancing. It's not qualitative and quantitative is not like a back-to-back, or quali is yes, and then it means quali is black, then it means quanti is white. That's not how it is done. But the context relevance becomes important. So I cannot be saying I'm doing a qualitative study that is representing Nigeria, and then all the data I collected was, please note, Nigeria is a country of 2 million people with 36 states and 6 geopolitical zones. So you do a qualitative study, generate information from 12 persons, all recruited from one of the 774 local governments in Nigeria, and say that your qualitative studies represent Nigeria. That's an overstretch. But you can do a qualitative study that represents Nigeria. The sample size cannot be the same, or the sample, or because your sample will have to reach saturation. You can't reach saturation from Nigeria with this diversity with 12%. I hope I answered that in some way. I don't think I was very straight, but that's the difference. People do understand the difference between quali and quanti, and they can contextualize them. You also asked the question about what are those sites where one can store their data. There are sites that you can store the data. One that I use is Fixsquare. There are quite a number of them, but some of them you will have to pay. I go to Fixsquare because it's free. Okay, so you can store your data there, but make sure it's clean. It's not raw. Everything is clean. It has the questionnaire also accessible, and then you have a reference for it. So anytime anybody is using that data, they can quote it as a reference actually. And how does one do the tracking when revising the manuscript? There are two ways you can do a tracking. Use your Word document and track. Even if you are revising your PDF, you track. The changes you make, just make it visible. The second thing I do, because tracking might become very distractive for me, is that I paint it in red. So all the original materials are in black, but the edits I make are in red. And when I move materials around, I usually paint it in green. Okay, I light it in green. Some also do highlights. They highlight it in yellow, but at least people can see clearly where the edits were affected. So you either use your track change in your Microsoft Word, or you track change when you're working on a PDF, or you highlight, or you use a different color for the additional materials you've added. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, he has two more questions. The second one was, what are these sites? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, you answered this, and the tracking one? Okay,
Yes, I've
so
answered 2 and 3. How do you track and what are the sites? I've answered them.
yeah, so Dr. Matinta is asking, are there any ethical considerations against outsourcing data analysis and manuscript writing? I have some across researchers hiring people to do the data analysis and manuscript writing on their behalf.
I think that's an excellent question. I will think that getting people with expertise is not to do the data analysis. It's okay. I would think, okay. Knowing that the data analyzer will be paid, and that doesn't make them a co-author, all right? However, I think it's completely unusual when you now outsource for manuscript writing. That makes you a ghost author. Go edit it. There's something called a ghost author. It means you did not write the manuscript, but your name is now put there as though you wrote. So for that word or phrase to exist, the co-author, ghost author, it makes it unethical for manuscript writing to be sourced on behalf of someone, and then the name of the person who didn't write now become ascribed to be a manuscript writer. It's an unethical practice. Yeah. But having someone do the data analysis and paid to do the data analysis, I think it's still conventional practice. You might not have all the skills. You could write your manuscript and share it with peers to review and make inputs. Maybe that's what you call contributors, and they're acknowledged, but they did not go through the whole process for you. So you're bringing in intelligence as much as possible. One of the things I used to do when I worked a lot in the community is that even before publication, we share with them, what is your perspective? How do you interpret this with the community of people that we actually generate the data for? And then the representation of the finding becomes a lot more robust and representative of the people where the data was collected from. But they didn't write, okay? And we didn't give it to them, or we can outsource it to someone else. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Over.
Okay, we have a new question from Immaculata. Dr. Immaculata says, please, Professor, is ethical approval required in every research work, or are they specific studies that require ethical approval? Thank you.
Excellent question. I would answer this very briefly. Any research that you're doing with human persons, dead or alive, directly or indirectly, requires ethics approval. I repeat, any study you're doing with human beings, directly or indirectly, dead or alive, you need ethics approval. Once you're doing a research that is going to affect people, involve people, please go get your ethics approval. And I can tell you this, you will be surprised how much your ethics approval will become your legal instruments in the days of trouble. I remember a group that was sharing where it's a program that they did that caused them to put the pictures of people on the bus because they had been through our training on monitoring and evaluation for some good reason. That state got ethics approval. Did you know that they instigated, the lawyers instigated these individuals to go to court? The only thing that saved them, the only thing that exonerated them was the ethics approval they had obtained. Once they showed the lawyer the ethics approval, that was the end of the case. Okay, so you never know where the troubles come from. And I've been in public places and they're doing programs and they're going to present, I'll tell you two incidents where they're going to present data. And they stop because they ask you, where's your ethics approval? That's the end. I was in an international meeting. No, I wasn't there. I was informed of an international meeting where this public presentation was going on about data that they also collected from Africa. It just all happened. The person from Uganda stood up. This study never got approval from my country. That was the end in public space. So believe me, baby, I'll cover my back. I'll rather overdo and cover my back, especially when you're going to publication. Please get ethics approval. It costs you, it saves you a lot of embarrassment rather than justifying. I tell people it is the ethics committee that decides that this research should get a waiver. It's not you that would say this research requires a waiver. The ethics committee makes a decision that this research gets a waiver and they give a certificate for that. It's not you to say there is a waiver. So please, whenever it's research, just go. Even if you're studying the ports and tires of the bicycle, please go collect your ethics approval. And that way you're covered. All right. And I just answered the last question. We have a minute. It says, what do you do when you discover that your data has been published without your information and your consent? If you really want to do something, write to the publisher and say that's your data, or write to the institution of the author and say that's your data. That's the way to go if you want to make troubles. But I think it's the right thing to do, actually. If you know you're sure it's your data that was published without your consent, write to the editor and write to the institution. I think we've gotten to the top of the hour. Thank you so much for having me, and I hand over to Sarah to close the day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Morenike, for this lovely session. And thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. I think this concludes today's session and also the series of webinars for the AFRONE mentorship program. Now the rest will be like just the mentorship program. So please, يعني keep close attention to your emails and your WhatsApp for any emails or messages that we send to proceed with the groups. Thank you for joining and have a great evening, everyone. I'll be sending the feedback link right here. So please just take a moment to fill in the form. Have a great evening. Dr. Muhammad, if you're asking about the minutes for today's webinar, it is recorded and it will be available on our YouTube and our LinkedIn, AFRONE. So just follow along and it will be uploaded later today, inshallah.